Odeka ete for 12 years. For 12 years. Kai pola pathusa hipopolon iatron, and had suffered much, pola much, pathusa suffered much. Hippo, polon, we know what hippo with the genitive is, right? By, with a personal agent. By polon hiatron, by many doctors. By many doctors. So the suffering, a part of the suffering anyway, was the result of going to a lot of doctors to try to get this bleeding taken care of. Kai dapanesasa ta par autes panta, and everything of hers, dapanesasa, had been spent in the result of this. Kai maiden ophelethesa, and there was in no way any relief. Ophelethesa, any relief. Allah malon esto gyron, but worse she had become as a result of este gyron. Elthusa, so coming, akusasa, we know what a kuo is, right? And having heard, peri tu Jesu, concerning the Lord, or about the Lord that was coming. Elthusasa into oklo, opisten, coming up into the crowd from behind, epsato to himatiu autu, she touched his garment. She touched his garment. There's a really interesting dynamic that goes on in this section of Scripture. All three of the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, record this, and they record all three of these things happening in a row. Jesus goes to the Gerasene area, or the Gadarene area, and he takes care of a demon who's been there, who's been crazy out, among the people, and he heals him of the demonic influence, and all of those demons go into a herd of pigs, and the pigs all run into the sea and die, right? And then he comes back, and immediately it says, as he comes back across the sea, he encounters this man, Jairus, who it says is a synagogue official, the one responsible for kind of putting together the worship that goes on at the synagogue. And it says that Jairus falls before him. So Jairus is in a place here of desperation. And he falls before him and says, "Would you please come? My daughter is on the point of death." Now, it's interesting because Jesus had been in this same town the day before. And then he went to the Gadarenes, and then he came back. So either the little girl had gotten much worse over that period of time, and he was in his last, And it also says that the little girl is monogenes, his only child. His only child. Not his only daughter, but his only child. So he's bereft. And while he's on the way there, he encounters a woman who has had a flow of blood for 12 years. Now, this is pretty bad on a couple of different levels. One, bleeding for 12 years physically is pretty horrible. I mean, it's all kinds of physical ailments could cause the bleeding, and as a result, and by the way, if you look in the Talmud, there's like 12 different cures for this happening, this bleeding of women that doesn't stop in there. About 6 of which are just kind of silly, like take the ash from an ostrich egg that's been burned up and sew it in the hem of your clothes and stuff of this nature. It's just kind of silly stuff. 6 of which is some kind of almost prescriptions, astringents or something to try to take care of this bleeding. But she tried everything, and she's bleeding. So physically, this ailment is horrible, but even more than that, from being a good Jew, from a social point of view, this is ruining her life. I mean, absolutely ruining her life. Because what happens when a woman is in the midst of her cycle and is bleeding? She is unclean. And anybody who touches her is unclean. So this woman has been untouchable for 12 years. Can you imagine the devastation that would bring into your life if you were untouchable for 12 years? 3 people Jesus interacts here. A man who's demon-possessed, a woman who's unclean because of bleeding, and when he gets to Jairus' house, what? A dead body. 3 things. 3 things you can't touch, right? As I read this passage to you and kind of translated it, it sounded like it was all full of verbs. But what I want you to see as we go back through it, that most of these, all of these words, and then I think there's 7 of them that end in this sigma alpha ending, are feminine nominative participles. They're not verbs, they're participles. They're describing. They may be describing an action, but not in the same way a verb does. They're relying on a verb. And they're all feminine nominative participles because they all connect to gene, right? So usa, being. This is the to be participle, the me participle. Being in a flow of blood. And then we have this next one, pathusa, suffering. And then we have this other one, dapanesasa, having spent everything, right? And then we have this next one, ophelesa, ophelethesa, having no relief. And the next one, actually you guys know this verb, although you don't know it in this principal part yet. This is from erchomai, okay, from erchomai. Coming and hearing and coming up behind him in the crowd. And then we finally get to one verb. What's the verb? She touched. She touched. If you didn't read this in the Greek, you would not be riveted by the one verb in this passage. Because in English, it doesn't come out that way. But when we read it in Greek, we understand that all of this comes down to and is focused on the main verb of her touching. Matter of fact, in one of the parallel passages, it says she just touched the hem of his garment. And she knew that that would make her well. And it did. In the midst of this, these 3 people that Jesus interacts with, what they all have in common is this. They're untouchable. And Jesus touches them. Their situation had completely put them outside of the ability for people to hug them. And that's the people that Jesus heals. There's a focus on the touch in this passage because I believe there's a focus on the touch that Jesus has in our lives. Where do we go when we're untouchable? Where do we go when we have shame? Where do we go? We just touch Jesus. We touch Jesus. And the healing power that flows out of him invigorates every area of our life.